Your eyes found me in the pulsing crowd. At that moment, the weight of the empty holster on my belt just seemed to vanish, along with all the seriousness I used to wear like a second skin. My name is Marcus. I'm 42 years old and I work as a security guard at Spectrum, one of Miami's hottest LGBT clubs. It's funny how life takes you down unexpected paths. With my 190 meters height, dark skin, and a neatly trimmed beard, I built my career making sure people who celebrate a freedom I never allowed myself to explore stayed safe. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Most people are surprised when they find out I live in a small apartment in the suburbs, a quiet, isolated place that's a big contrast from the busy club where I work. My routine is simple and predictable. I wake up at 2 p.m. I do my strict workout, have a hearty meal, and then head into my shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. There isn't much room for relationships in this life, and maybe that's exactly what always attracted me to it. At first, I got this job out of pure necessity. After 15 years working security at regular bars, Spectrum offered me double the pay. I hesitated. Not out of prejudice, but because it felt weird to hide a world I never explored. Even though deep down I had a curiosity I was too afraid to name. At the club, I've built a reputation for unwavering professionalism. The regulars know me as Marcus the Serious Guy. I carry that nickname with a bit of irony, considering the whirlwind of thoughts and questions buzzing in my head as I keep that blank expression. In 8 years working there, I learned to trust my gut. I can spot problems before they start, tell when someone feels uncomfortable with an unwanted approach, and step in discreetly when needed. Being able to read people and situations is a skill that comes in very handy in my line of work. That particular Friday night, everything felt normal. The dance floor was packed, stroboscopic lights sliced through an air heavy with perfume and sweat, and the bass reverberated off the walls and inside our chests. I was stationed near the stairs to the second floor, arms crossed, scanning every visible corner with steady eyes. Then he walked in. He was tall, probably in his 30s, walking with a natural, confident air, not arrogant, just natural. He wore a tight black shirt that showed off a very defined physique. Our eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. I quickly looked away and returned to my job, but a peculiar feeling stayed in my stomach. The full stories, unfiltered and with all the details you can imagine, are available now. Check the link in the description right away. My look at the drunken man made it quite clear that it was time to back off. "Yeah, thanks," the man in the black shirt replied, and something in his tone made me stay a second longer than what would have been strictly professional. "I'm Alexander," he added, extending his hand. "Marcus," I responded, shaking his hand. A firm grip was followed by a smile that caught me off guard. I returned to my post, but now I couldn't ignore his presence. Now and then, our eyes met in the crowd, and each time it felt like a little electric shock ran up my spine. Near the end of the night, as the club started to empty, Alexander came over to the bar near where I was standing. "Do you always work here?" he asked casually after ordering a glass of water. "5 nights a week for the last 8 years, I replied, keeping it professional even though a part of me wished the conversation could go on. "It's the first time I've really noticed you," he commented, his eyes studying my face with a disarming intensity. "I'm here every week," I continued. "You must be really focused on work if you didn't notice the regulars." There was a playful tone in his voice that made me relax just a bit. "It's part of the job to observe without being noticed," I said with a slight smile. The conversation flowed surprisingly easily over the next few minutes. Alexander was 36, worked in investments, and had recently gotten divorced after 7 years of marriage to a woman. "I'm in a phase of rediscovery," he explained with disarming honesty. "I've always known I was bisexual, but I chose the easy path. Now, I'm learning to honor every part of me." His honesty caught me by surprise. In response, I ended up sharing more than I usually would with a stranger. About my lonely routine, about how working at the club was initially just a well-paying job. "And now?" he asked, leaning a little closer. "Is it still just a job?" That question hung between us with unspoken meanings. Before I could answer, I was called away to handle something at the entrance. When I got back, Alexander had left a card with his number on the bar counter along with a note that read, "For when you're not on duty." Over the following days, That card burned a hole in my pocket. I found myself taking it out over and over, looking at the elegantly printed number, mentally rehearsing messages. I had never felt like this before, especially not for a man. It was confusing, scary, and somehow incredibly exciting. On Sunday, my day off, I finally sent a simple message. "This is Marcus from Spectrum." The reply came almost immediately. "I thought you weren't going to get in touch. I'm free today. Can we meet?" He suggested a lookout point on the hills outside town. "A discreet and quiet place," he said. I agreed, driven by a curiosity that finally outweighed my fears. The sun was setting as I parked my car next to his. Alexander was leaning against his car, gazing at the city below. Dressed casually, he looked very different from the man at the club. More approachable, more real. We sat on an old bench with the cityscape spreading out before us, the lights starting to twinkle as night set in. "I come here to think," he explained. "I discovered this spot right after I moved here." Our conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences. We talked about childhood, work, movies. He told me about his marriage, how he'd known from the start that something was missing, but comfort and expectations kept him there for so long. "And you? You've always been—" He hesitated, trying to find the right word. "Honestly, I never really allowed myself to think about it," I admitted. "I grew up in an environment where certain topics were never discussed. I focused on work, on survival. Relationships always seemed too complicated." Alexander nodded, understanding. Life has a funny way of forcing us to face what we try to avoid. A cold wind blew, making me shiver slightly. Alexander, noticing, moved closer. His shoulder brushed mine, a warm, solid presence that I didn't pull away from. "You know what's ironic?" I murmured. "I spend my nights watching people freely show who they are, living their truth, while I never had the courage to do the same." Alexander turned to me, his eyes reflecting the distant city lights. "It's never too late to start living authentically, Marcus." The closeness between us sparked a tension you could almost touch. I felt my heart racing like I hadn't in years. When he leaned in, I didn't pull back. Our first kiss was hesitant and gentle. A test, a question. After we pulled away, I saw my own surprise reflected in his eyes alongside something else, a certainty I hadn't felt before. I started, but the words just wouldn't come. "I know," he said simply, his hand finding mine between us. "We don't need to rush." The touch of our joined hands felt even more intimate than the kiss. It was a gesture of understanding and patience. Something inside me, a wall built over decades, began to crumble. We sat there for hours, talking and occasionally kissing, exploring this new dimension opening up between us. With every moment, I felt layers of my defenses dissolve, revealing a side of Marcus I barely knew. When the night got too cold, Alexander suggested we meet again. "Tomorrow? I can make lunch at my place." I hesitated for a moment, thinking about what that step would mean, but something had changed inside me that night. A door had been opened, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it closed again. "Yeah," I said finally. "I'd like that." We exchanged one last kiss before heading to our cars. On the drive home, my mind bounced between the fear of the unknown and the excitement of finally living something real. For years, I had watched life pass me by without really participating. Now, suddenly, I was at the center of my own story, the protagonist instead of just an observer. It was both terrifying and liberating. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed every moment, every word, every touch. I wondered if I was ready for what came next, if I had the courage to continue down this path. But one truth had taken hold inside me. No matter what happened with Alexander, I could never go back to being the old Marcus. An essential truth had awakened, and it needed to be recognized. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of anxiety and expectation I hadn't felt since my first days on the job. I spent way too long choosing my clothes, something I'd never done before since I always prioritized comfort over looks. I picked a dark blue shirt an ex-girlfriend once said suited my skin tone and a newer pair of jeans. The address Alexander sent was in an upscale neighborhood, with spacious houses and well-kept gardens. His modern townhouse stood out among the traditional homes nearby. It was all glass, concrete, and clean lines. I parked my old Honda in the circular driveway, feeling suddenly out of place. I sat in the car for a few minutes, taking deep breaths and trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts. You can just drive away, I told myself. Come up with an excuse. Go back to your normal life. But what was my normal life? Empty days and nights watching others truly live? That thought gave me the courage to finally step out of the car. Alexander opened the door before I even rang the bell, as if he'd been waiting for me eagerly. He was wearing a simple white t-shirt and linen shorts, looking both casual and sophisticated. Right on time, he said with a smile, stepping aside. Come on in. Inside, his house was as impressive as the exterior. Spacious, minimalist, with huge windows bathing everything in natural light. The decor was elegant without being flashy, showing off a refined taste. Wow, I blurted out, looking around. This place is amazing. Thanks, Alexander said, guiding me from the living room to an open kitchen with a central island. Architecture has always been a hobby. I designed a lot of it myself. On the countertop, ingredients looked neatly arranged: fresh vegetables, aromatic herbs, and fish fillets. I hope you like Mediterranean food, he said, washing his hands at the sink. I was thinking of making something light for this heat. Can I help? I offered, feeling odd about just watching. Alexander looked at me appreciatively. Sure, you can start by chopping those tomatoes. We worked side by side, our arms occasionally brushing as we prepared the meal. There was a casual intimacy in that everyday moment that turned out to be even deeper than the kisses from the night before. We talked easily about cooking, travels, music, a few safe topics that let us dance around that underlying tension. How did you get into security? Alexander asked while the fish was marinating. I told him about my dad, who was also a security guard, and about how I got into the profession out of necessity when I dropped out of college to help my family after my mom got sick. It wasn't the original plan, but I discovered I had a knack for it. I noticed things. I anticipated problems. And kept people safe, he added, looking at me with an intensity that made my stomach flutter. That really says something about you, you know? I looked away suddenly, feeling vulnerable. And you? How did you get into finance? While Alexander recounted his journey, college in economics, a master's in finance, the tough early years until he set up his own consultancy, I watched how his hands moved with precision, the rhythm of his speech, and how his face lit up talking about his successes. There was a confidence in him that I both admired and kinda envied. We had lunch on the back porch, overlooking a small but elegant garden. The fish was delicious, seasoned with herbs and lemon, paired with grilled vegetables and a refreshing white wine. You cook really well, I complimented after a few sips of wine that relaxed me. Living alone makes you learn, he said with a smile. And you? Do you cook? Just enough to get by, I admitted. Nothing as fancy as this. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, carrying a hint of jasmine. For a moment, we savored the comfortable silence between us. Can I ask something personal? Alexander finally broke the silence, setting his glass down. I nodded even though I felt my muscles tense. Was last night your first kiss with a man? The question hung in the air. I thought about lying, making up past experiences to seem less inexperienced, less vulnerable. But something in the way Alexander looked at me, without judgment, just genuine curiosity, made me honest. Yes, I replied simply. It was. He nodded thoughtfully. How did it feel? I took a moment to find the right words. Different, unexpected, and at the same time, strangely familiar, as if a part of me always knew it would happen eventually. Alexander reached out, letting his fingers lightly touch mine across the table. Thanks for trusting me with that. That simple touch sent a jolt through me, making my heart race. The air between us suddenly felt charged. Let's go to the living room, he suggested softly. Maybe we can open another bottle. In the spacious living room, we plopped down on the sofa a little closer than necessary. The wine, the amazing food, and our easy conversation created a warm atmosphere of growing intimacy. While Alexander told a story about a trip to Greece, I caught him glancing at my lips every so often, finding little excuses to touch my arm or shoulder. The tension between us built like an unstoppable wave. When he finally paused his story, the silence that followed was full of possibilities. "Marcus," he murmured, as if my name was a caress. "Can I kiss you again?" The request was so clear, so respectful, and it made the heat spread through my body. I leaned in, closing the gap between us. This kiss was different from the first, less hesitant, more intense. His hands reached my face, holding me with a mix of firmness and tenderness that made my heart leap. I instinctively put my hands on his shoulders, feeling the strength beneath his soft t-shirt. When his hand slid under my shirt, the contact of his palm on my skin made me let out an involuntary sound. Alexander deepened the kiss, drawing me closer until we were almost completely wrapped up together on the sofa. We lost track of time, exploring this new territory with bolder kisses and touches. Every barrier that fell, a undone button, a tossed-aside shirt, was followed by a pause, a questioning look, and a tacit permission. "Should we move somewhere more comfortable?" he suggested after a while, his voice husky with desire. That was the moment of decision. Up until then, what we were doing felt like testing the waters, a bit of experimentation and curiosity. The next step would be something more definite, something transformative. I hesitated for a moment, but not because I wasn't sure what I wanted. It was the weight of what it meant. "Yeah," I finally said, my voice stronger than I expected. Alexander stood up and offered his hand. I took it, letting him guide me through the house to his bedroom, a spacious room dominated by a king-size bed with dark sheets. The afternoon light filtered softly through semi-open blinds, creating a play of shadows and brightness that made everything feel both revealing and mysterious. Alexander stopped at the foot of the bed and turned to me. "If at any moment you want to stop, just say so," he said in a serious tone. "There's no pressure here." Knowing he cared so much only deepened what I felt. "I want this," I said, surprising even myself with how certain I was. What followed was an exploration of bodies, of sensations, of long-repressed desires. Alexander guided me with patience and experience, always paying attention to my reactions. He set a pace that respected my new territory, while slowly leading me to depths of pleasure I'd never known. His hands knew exactly where and how to touch me. Every caress felt like he was deciphering a secret code written on my skin, a code I didn't even know existed. When his lips began their slow descent along my body, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel everything, surrendering to the sensation completely. It felt like diving into deep, unknown waters, first scary, then incredibly liberating. My body responded naturally, matching his rhythm. The pleasure built in waves that grew stronger and stronger. At one point, Alexander looked right into my eyes as our bodies came together, and I felt something inside me break. The last wall of denial crumbled violently. For the first time, I wasn't just the security guard watching other people's lives. I was finally the main character in my own life. Afterwards, lying side by side on the rumpled bed with our bodies still touching, a hand on a chest, legs entwined, a comfortable silence wrapped around us. Reality slowly came back. "How do you feel?" Alexander finally asked, looking straight at me. It was a simple question, but the answer was unbelievably complex. How do I explain something I'm still trying to figure out? How can I name these mixed-up sensations and emotions inside? "I feel alive," I finally said. "I feel intensely alive." A slow smile spread over Alexander's face. He reached out and gently traced my jawline. "That's a pretty good way to put it." We sat there talking softly as the afternoon passed. Alexander shared his own journey of self-discovery, how he had repressed his desires for so long until he couldn't ignore them anymore, how his marriage eventually ended when he found the courage to be honest with himself and his wife. "It was the hardest time of my life," he admitted, "but also the most freeing. It felt like I could finally breathe after years of only half-breaths." His words hit me hard. How long had I been living only half a life? How long had I just watched life instead of really living it? As the daylight faded and the room turned into a sanctuary of soft shadows, I felt both peaceful and uneasy. What happened between us wasn't just physical. It was a turning point. A moment that split my life into before and after. "What are you thinking about?" Alexander asked, breaking the silence. "About how I made it to 42 without ever really knowing this part of me," I confessed. "About all those years spent just going through the motions instead of truly living." Alexander rested his elbow on my shoulder, and his eyes met mine in the growing dusk. "Some people never reach that moment, Marcus. They live full lives and never really find themselves. You had the courage to let yourself discover who you are." "Courage?" I asked. "Or desperation? Maybe I was just tired of feeling incomplete." "That's exactly what courage means," he said softly. "Facing the unknown because staying stuck is no longer an option." We sat in silence for a few moments, our silhouettes barely visible in the dark. "And now?" I finally asked, all the uncertainty about the future weighing on my voice. Alexander reached for a lamp nearby, bathing us in soft golden light. His eyes, when they met mine again, were serious and determined. "That depends on you, Marcus. What happened today might just be an experience, something you needed to feel to understand this part of yourself. Or it could be the beginning of something more." There was a vulnerability in his voice that contrasted with his usual confidence, as if, despite his experience, he was still navigating uncertain waters. "I don't know if I'm ready for labels," I admitted. "This is all so new for me." Alexander nodded understandingly. "We don't need to define anything right now. Let's just let it happen naturally and find out together what it means." His hand found mine on the sheets, our fingers naturally interlocking as if they belonged together. "But I want you to know," he continued after a pause, "that I really like you, Marcus. Not just physically. I like your honesty, your quiet strength, the way you see the world. I feel like there's so much more to discover about you, and I'd love that chance." His words stirred something deep inside, a longing for a connection I'd ignored for so long, almost as if I'd forgotten it even existed. The idea of exploring this uncharted territory with Alexander by my side was both intimidating and irresistibly attractive. "I'd like that too," I said, surprised by how firm my voice sounded. A smile broke over Alexander's face, his eyes shining in the soft light. Leaning in, he kissed me again. A different kiss from before, one not just driven by desire but by something deeper, something lasting. When we pulled apart, he kept his face close to mine, our eyes locked in a moment of mutual understanding. "Marcus," he said, my name sounding like a gentle caress. "I know it's early, and I totally understand if you think I'm rushing things, but would you consider dating me? Officially?" That question hung in the air, heavy with meaning and possibilities. Just a month ago, or even a day ago, a question like that would have sent me running. But something had fundamentally changed inside me. A door had opened, and I had no desire to close it again. "I've never dated a man before," I said honestly. "I'm not sure how things work, how people will react, or how it will affect my job. I have a lot of insecurities and so many unanswered questions." Alexander waited patiently, his eyes never leaving mine. "But yes," I finally added, "I'd like to try, as long as we take it slow and you have patience with me while I figure this out." The look on his face, a mix of joy, relief, and tenderness, made my heart swell in a way I'd never experienced. "All the time in the world," he promised as he sealed his words with another gentle kiss. Lying there in the arms of someone who, until recently, was nearly a stranger, I felt like I was finally coming home. After years of wandering uncharted territory, I was returning. Not to a physical place, but to a state of being. A personal truth waiting to be discovered. The road ahead would be challenging, full of obstacles and uncertainties. There would be tough questions, moments of doubt, maybe even rejection from those close to me. But in that quiet room, with Alexander's steady presence by my side, I felt a deep certainty that no matter what happened, I was finally on the right path. For so many years I had been Marcus, the serious guy, the silent observer, the protector, always there but never truly part of life. Now at 42, I was about to write a new chapter, one where I wasn't just watching life, I was living it. We'd meet in the mornings before he headed to the office or after my shift, sharing breakfast as the city woke up. On my days off, we explored Miami together, rediscovering the city through the eyes of someone who genuinely loved it. I never really appreciated this place before, I confessed, as we strolled along the beach on a quiet Sunday. It was always just where I lived, not a place to really experience. Alexander squeezed my hand, a gesture that still sent a little jolt through me when we were in public, even though I was slowly getting used to it. It's interesting how someone's presence can completely change the way we see a place, he observed. Or even ourselves. That last part struck a deep chord in me. I was changing, maybe even revealing myself, like a sculpture that had always been hidden inside a block of stone, just waiting for discovery. Some parts of the transition felt surprisingly natural. Alexander's company, his genuine laugh, the way his face lit up when he saw me. It quickly became an essential part of my life, as if a spot had been left open just for him. But there were challenges too. Work, for example, constantly loomed over me. What would happen when my colleagues at Spectrum found out? And the regulars who knew me as the distant, unflappable security guard, how would they react? Sensing my anxiety, Alexander said, "We don't have to rush anything. Your process is yours, in your own time." "I don't want to live a double life," I replied. "I've spent too long hiding parts of who I am, even from myself." After a month of dating, I made a big decision. It was time for Alexander to see my small apartment in the suburbs, the place that had been my solitary refuge for so many years. "You sure about this?" he asked when I invited him. "I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady. "I want you to see where I come from, who I am when I'm not with you." That evening, I spent hours tidying and cleaning the apartment, suddenly aware of how it revealed so much about my past. A spare, functional space designed for efficiency, not comfort or style. The empty walls and lack of personal belongings spoke of a minimalist life that now felt oddly sterile. When the doorbell rang, I felt a nervous energy I hadn't experienced since our first night together. I opened the door and found Alexander holding a bottle of wine and a small plant in a ceramic pot. "I thought your place could use a bit of greenery," he said with a gentle smile. I watched him wander through my apartment, taking in the few books on my shelf, mostly about military history and security, the modest TV, and the rarely used kitchen. There was no judgment in his gaze, just genuine curiosity. "It's very you," he finally said as he sat on the sofa. "Orderly, functional, without any distractions." "Too sterile?" I asked, suddenly anxious about what he might really think. He shook his head and reached out to me. "It reflects who you were. A place where you could retreat from the world when needed." His expression softened. "But now I'm excited to see how this place evolves as you do." That night marked a subtle but important shift in our relationship. Making love in my own bed, the most personal space I have, I felt the last barriers between my old life and my new self fade away. Alexander wasn't separate from my world anymore. He had become part of it. The next morning, we woke with the sun streaming through the thin curtains in my bedroom. Alexander snuggled closer, his arm wrapped around my waist. "And at Spectrum?" he asked softly. "How's it going?" That question struck a nerve. I had been carefully keeping my work life separate from my relationship with Alexander. He hadn't been back to the club, and I hadn't mentioned us to anyone on the job. "I'm still figuring it out," I admitted. "It's complicated." Alexander nodded against my shoulder. "No rush." "The irony is that I've spent 8 years working in an LGBT club," I mused. "It should be the safest place to be your true self." "Sometimes the places that seem safest for others are exactly where we feel most exposed," Alexander said, "because the expectations are so high." His words perfectly captured my dilemma. At Spectrum, I'd built a specific image, the serious, professional, distant guard. Changing that image meant showing a vulnerability I'd spent my life hiding. "I'll find a way," I promised, both to him and to myself. That chance came unexpectedly a few nights later. During my shift, I noticed a younger man being hassled by a group on the dance floor. The situation was escalating subtly, with the guy clearly uncomfortable yet trying not to cause a scene. I went over, my imposing presence usually enough to smooth things over. "Is there a problem here, guys?" The leader of the group, a bit sloshed, glared at me. "None of your business. We're just talking to our friend." The young man gave me a look that said it all, a mix of fear and a silent plea for help. "Looks like your friend would rather be left alone," I said firmly in a neutral tone. "And who do you think you are?" the drunk snapped, stepping toward me. "The defender of gays now? Or maybe you're one of them too?" There was a tense pause. I felt curious eyes on me, waiting to see what I'd do. Something I'd once kept completely separate from my personal life. But something had changed. "Yes," I said simply, my voice firm and clear. "I am one of them too. And this is a safe space for all of us. I suggest you and your buddies take your night elsewhere." The man's shock faded quickly into a sarcastic smile. Just as he was about to reply, Roger, another guard, came over and stood beside me. With both of us there, the group backed off, muttering as they left. The young man shot me a look full of gratitude before disappearing into the crowd. When I turned, I noticed Roger watching me with a curious grin. "8 years working together," he commented. "I think this is the first time you've let something personal show on the job." I shrugged, feeling a strange lightness. Maybe it's time for some changes. Roger smiled and patted my shoulder before returning to his post. "Welcome to the club, brother." That brief encounter was like a spark. In the following days, I noticed a subtle shift in how my co-workers and regulars interacted with me. There were no big declarations or confrontations, just a quiet acknowledgement, a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. When I told Alexander about it, he hugged me tightly. "I'm proud of you." It felt weird, I admitted. After years of just watching life go by, I finally felt like I belonged. "And how does that make you feel?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I thought for a moment. "Complete," I finally said. Like a missing piece finally found its place. The next Sunday, 3 months after we first met, Alexander surprised me with an invitation to a special dinner at his place. When I arrived, I found the veranda table set meticulously, with candles lit and soft music playing in the background. "What's the occasion?" I asked as he poured the wine. Alexander smiled with a mysterious twinkle in his eyes. "Don't we need an occasion to celebrate?" Dinner was, as always, delicious. Alexander had made my favorite dishes, which he'd learned over our weeks together. We talked about everything and nothing, enjoying the natural flow of our conversation. After dessert, Alexander suddenly looked nervous, something rare for someone usually so confident. He got up, went to a drawer in the living room, and came back with a small object in his hand. "Marcus," he began as he sat down again, "these last few months have been extraordinary. Getting to know you, seeing you open up and bloom has been the highlight of my life." My heart raced, wondering what would come next. "I know we're still early in our journey and that you're just beginning to explore this part of yourself. I don't want to rush anything," he said. He reached into his hand and showed me a silver key. "This is the key to my house. I'm not asking you to move in. I know we're not there yet. But I want you to know that my place is your place whenever you want." The emotion in that moment caught me off guard. A lump rose in my throat and my eyes welled up. In my 42 years, I'd never received a gesture so simple, yet so deeply meaningful. "I don't know what to say," I managed, my voice thick with feeling. "You don't have to say anything," Alexander replied, covering my hand with his. "Just know that no matter what pace we follow, I'm committed to this. To us." Looking at that little silver key that held so much meaning, I felt something settle inside me. A quiet certainty, a peace I'd never known. "I'm committed too," I said, my voice gaining clarity. "I'm committed to us." That night, lying next to Alexander and watching his profile in the dark, I reflected on the unbelievable path that had brought us here. From an orderly yet empty existence to a vibrant, uncertain present. From Marcus, the serious guy, the distant observer, to simply Marcus, an active participant in my own life. There was still so much to discover. A lot of challenges ahead. My family, for one. How would they react when I eventually introduced them to Alexander? And my career. Should I stay in security or look for new horizons? The future remained hazy in many ways. But for the first time in my life, uncertainty didn't scare me. Instead, there was something deeply liberating about not knowing exactly what was next and letting life unfold naturally instead of trying to control every detail. In the midst of these thoughts, I felt Alexander stir beside me as he snuggled closer in his sleep. I instinctively wrapped my arm around him, pulling him against my chest. Holding him, feeling his steady breath against my skin, filled me with a sense of belonging I'd never experienced before. It was bittersweet to think that after 8 years working in a place dedicated to free expression and acceptance, I discovered that real freedom begins inside yourself. All those nights watching others live authentically turned out to be steps leading me to my own journey of self-discovery. Life has its own timeline, I thought. Some people figure it out in their teens, some in their 20s. For me, it took reaching 42 and meeting an unexpected man on an ordinary work night to finally understand a fundamental truth about who I am. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's no right time to discover yourself or to let yourself live fully. What matters is that I finally found the courage to embrace every part of who I am. Not just the parts that are convenient or socially acceptable, but the whole, complex, and sometimes contradictory person I truly am. As sleep took over, one last thought crossed my mind. For years, I worked to ensure others could express themselves freely in a safe space. Now, at last, I'd created that safe space inside of me. A place where I can be authentic, vulnerable, and complete. And that, I realize with quiet clarity, is the greatest security anyone can ever want. Our relationship continued to grow at a pace that respected my process of self-discovery, even as our connection deepened. At Spectrum, my co-workers adapted to the new Marcus with a surprising ease. Sometimes Alexander would come by at the end of my shift, and we'd share a quick goodbye kiss, a gesture that, at first, made me anxious but soon felt natural. One particularly busy night at the club, I noticed a middle-aged man watching me intently from behind the bar. There was something familiar in his gaze, but I couldn't figure out where I knew him from. When our eyes met, he raised his glass in a small toast from across the room, a discreet smile playing on his lips. It wasn't until the end of the night, as he was leaving, that he briefly stopped by my side. "Thank you," he said simply. I raised an eyebrow, confused. "For what exactly?" "For showing that it's never too late," he replied. "To find yourself. To be who you really are." And before I could say anything, he had melted into the night, leaving me with a strange feeling that somehow I'd impacted a stranger's life. It was a curious reversal. I, who'd spent years quietly watching life, was suddenly being watched, perhaps even inspiring someone to find their own courage. That same night, when I got home, not my apartment but Alexander's place, where I now spent most of my time, I found him asleep on the sofa with a book open on his chest, waiting for me like he often did. I sat down gently beside him and softly touched his face to wake him. Alexander slowly opened his eyes, and a sleepy smile appeared as he saw me. "Hey, you," he murmured in his husky, tired voice. "Hey," I replied, leaning in for a soft kiss. "Want to go to bed?" Alexander nodded, standing up and intertwining his fingers with mine. Together, we walked to the bedroom, a simple ritual that had become one of the most precious moments of my day. That feeling of coming home, to him, to the life we were building together, was everything. That is the true privilege of life. The ability to grow, to discover new sides of ourselves no matter our age or circumstances, to eventually find the place where we truly belong. And if you're watching this video, questioning your own journey and wondering if it's ever too late to transform, let me tell you, it's never too late to discover who you are. Never too late to open doors we've kept closed out of fear or conformity. True security isn't about staying still behind walls of expectations and convention. It's in the brave move toward who we really are, in letting ourselves be seen completely, even when it's vulnerable. If this story touched you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about self-discovery, courage, and transformation. Turn on notifications so you don't miss new episodes of this and other stories that celebrate authenticity in all its forms. It's life itself, vibrant, pulsing, brimming with possibilities for those brave enough to step onto the dance floor and groove to their own beat.